talking about the emotionally mature Christian for the next few days. And why is that an important subject? Because as Peter Scazzero says in his book, it is impossible to be spiritually mature while remaining emotionally immature. And I believe this is a huge problem within the church community. I was an emotionally immature Christian for many years, and I saw the devastation that it did to my family, my witness, my testimony. And so this is an area we need to pay attention to. And I think it might be even more prevalent now than ever because of just so many factors within our families, social media, and so many other things. Some of it comes from a false teaching that when we get saved, everything kind of poof goes away. And that's just not true. We have to work on our healing. We have to work through our pain from the past. And so that's what we're going to be talking a lot about in the next few days. But first, if you like the content or you'd like to know more about what I'm going to be talking about, hit subscribe. And I would love to get some comments if you have any thoughts on the subject that we're talking about. So before we start talking about the emotionally mature Christian, let's look at what emotional immaturity is, because we have to know what we don't want to be to understand what we do want to be. And so we're going to go over some traits of emotional immaturity. But as you're looking at this, I want to encourage you, please do not look at everyone else. That's what we have a tendency to do, right? I'm going to look at, oh, I see that in my spouse. I see that in my friend. I see that in my parent. I see this in my children. No, what I want you to do as we talk about this is look within yourself. One of the greatest traits of emotional maturity is being able to own and take responsibility for who we are and the things that we do, to be self-aware and see if we have some things that we need to work on. So here's our list. Number one, emotionally immature people are highly defensive and reactive. So they do this in two ways. They either become aggressive, they get defensive, or they shut down. And that is because they're taking things personally. They've not worked through things of the past. And so they are just being triggered often, many times, and a lot. So they do things without thinking long-term consequences. They say things without thinking long-term consequences. And I do want to take note that sometimes we think, well, if we don't say mean things or we don't react emotionally and we just shut down, that is a better way of dealing with things. But truly, silent treatment is a form of nonverbal abuse. And that's, of course, if we do that over a long term. We can have a moment that we need some space, and that's okay. But I'm talking about we do this for hours and days and sometimes longer. The second trait of an emotionally immature person is that everything centers around them. It's always about them. It always comes back to them. They will say things like, but imagine how I feel, when you're trying to explain your feelings. Emotional maturity is to realize the world does not revolve around you. And that's a big step for us when we can finally get that. I mean, we can really say we're becoming adults when we realize we are not the center of the world. Emotionally immature people often blame others for what they do or how they feel. You probably have heard this, you made me feel angry and that's why I did what I did. To grow is to understand that the only one responsible for what we do or not do is us. We recognize our mistakes, we acknowledge them, and we learn from them. Also, to learn to repair when we have done something that's been hurtful, or even allow someone else to help, if they have done something hurtful, that we allow them to try to repair, and then to ask for forgiveness when we've done something, again, that has been hurtful to someone around us. An emotionally immature person rarely listens to other people's advice because they kind of feel like they know everything. So they look to other people to solve their problems. And the problem is that even though they're always asking for advice, they rarely do what the person says. They ignore the advice. They just kind of want to talk about it, and then they mostly feel like, oh, I'm going to do it my way anyway. Emotionally immature people are dismissive of feelings of others, and they lack empathy for other people. They'll say things like, you're so sensitive, you can't take a joke, minimizing how the other person feels. And an emotionally immature person has black and white thinking. And what that means is everything's good or it's bad. There's nothing in between. There's no compromise. So I'm either in the relationship or I'm out. I'm not going to work things in the middle. I'm a success or I'm a failure. That is very immature thinking. And the last one is they take everything personally. Everything is a personal attack and a threat instead of constructive criticism or just someone expressing the way they feel about a particular subject. So I do know that a lot of people want to hear these traits, and I'm going to get comments about, well, that's narcissistic behavior, or that's this or that. But I want to make it clear, I am not for what we're doing here talking about mental illness. I'm not talking about addiction or abuse. We're really trying to lay a foundation for just everyday people that need to grow emotionally. And there's a lot of them. You don't have to be mentally ill, have an addiction, or be abusive to have these traits. So that's why it's so important that we really listen and begin to apply this to ourselves. We all have some of these things. It's just how big they are and how much we are aware of them. I want to bring some scripture into this and show biblically how important this is, and that this is all basically backed up by the Bible. And so it says in Luke 2:52 that Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and with man. In these passages, scripture speaks of Jesus' physical, emotional, intellectual, spiritual, and relational growth and development. Jesus sat among the Jewish teachers, listened to them, and asked questions of them as part of his intellectual and emotional growth. So he had mentors. He was watching, he was learning. He listened to wise counsel and teachings because that created awareness in him of the things he needed to work on throughout his life. Scripture speaks that Jesus retreated in rest, silence, solitude, and prayer. Jesus practiced self-care and boundaries. He built quiet time into his schedule with God. And it was a very busy schedule. So that's part of emotional maturity. All the things that we just talked about that Jesus did. And that's how he grew in maturity. Because of this balance in his life, Jesus also grew in favor with people, because when we are healthy, we're going to have good relationships. He established trust in relationships. He displayed empathy toward people and compassion. And he engaged everyone in conversations, adversaries, people with different lifestyles, different opinions. He was able to have conversations with people of all different groups. So Jesus is our clearest and best example of what an emotionally mature Christian looks like.